Okay, so now we're going to do a flower drawing, and I'm just going to go over real quick what we did from the last slide. I usually put mine formatted in a little box here with name, location, date, time, what the sky is like. If there were clouds out there, I might even draw some little pictures, and if it doesn't fit there, I put it out here. Wind direction, temperature, and humidity. And I can get those from my phone real easily. And then I've just put some notes about what I'm seeing in my environment, all the way from what the breezes are like, flowers that are blooming, wildlife that I see moving, things of that sort. But there's also places to put, this is also the place to put questions and anything else like that that you have. And as you start drawing, you'll come up with more questions to add. So don't think that you have to do all that first. So now I'm going to start with the flower itself. I'm going to have a fire wheel, otherwise known as Gaillardia pucella. So I'm going to go ahead and draw that. And I'm going to start by looking at the overall shape of it. So I compare the height of it to the width. I notice that it is slightly at an axis here. And I'm going to draw my overall shape thinking more like a mitten on a hand. So I'm not going to try the detail first. I'm going to go for the overall shape. I'm using a blue pencil here that I talked about earlier. They don't photograph, so you can do it with a blue pencil, but you don't have to. You can certainly use any kind of a light pencil mark. The center of my flower, the disc flower, is about 1/3. And it is more rounded than the shape of the flower. So I want to make sure that I have that slightly more round looking in comparison to the overall flower. Okay, so now I'm going to start looking at individual ray flowers of this, and I'm going to look at them as how they are attached and where they're attached, and what kind of angles they come off at. So I'm going to look at it and compare it to a clock. That makes it very simple. So my first one, the top one, I'm noticing that it is off from the center, slightly to the right, and it is straight up and down 12 o'clock. So I'm just going to draw one line at this point. I know there are 8 petals. I'm going to get them all placed, and if I try to do the detail first, I will either run out of room or, it just won't end up right. The second one is attached approximately at 1:30. You can also compare angles like that when I'm using a photo. Out in the field, that's not going to be the case. So with this third petal that I'm drawing, here's the center. It is lower, attached lower, so I want to make sure I come down here. But the angle is 3 o'clock. This one is about 4, down through the center part of the lobe. This one is about 7. This one is about 8. This one is 9. And notice that even though this one is 9 and this one is 3, they're attached differently. This one is higher, about the center. This one was lower. So here's my center, and there's 9 o'clock. This one is about 11. Okay, so I've got 8 lines now on here representing each of the petals, and this line goes up through the center. I haven't really addressed curves or anything like that yet, merely the angles. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of lightly sketch in, which is really not even necessary, but since this may be the first one you've seen drawn, I'm just going to do that, just to indicate something you might want to do with your first drawing or two. I'm just going to draw in the center petal first, and I'm going to assume that the outside edge of that tip goes to the outside of my oval that I originally drew. If it's not exact, it really doesn't matter. I'm just trying to get a good indication of the placement, the widths of those. Notice this one is much narrower because of the way, the angle that you're viewing it at. These look a lot broader. They're closer to you, so it's a little bit of perspective in there, as well as just the way that the angle that you're viewing it from. So I've got the tips of all those. And because we're doing a quick demo, you know, with your first one, you may want to draw it all out in pencil first. I'm not going to do that because, after all, this is a sketch. This is not a precise botanical illustration that I might spend a month working on. So I'm going to go ahead and sketch those out. Even if you see a botanical illustrator's sketchbook, it will look great, but it's still not going to be as precise as their full-blown illustrations that they work on for a long time. You just don't expect that. You can't expect that. If my lines waver, that's all right. Remember, this is a sketch. I'm looking at, while I draw these, the distance between the petals as well as how they attach, the width, and it really pays to spend more time looking at what you're drawing and less time at your paper. And also apologize if I drift off some, because that's just how it is when you draw. You get into the zone of the drawing and you either forget to talk or it just becomes kind of difficult to do both at the same time. And that's real common. You can always tell when somebody's focusing because of that. Nothing wrong with talking, it just makes it more difficult to draw. I'm going to draw this petal first because it overlaps that one. It just will make it a lot simpler. I'm trying my best to get the spaces and shapes between all the little individual ray flowers the same as they are here. I see, obviously, that this original angle that I drew, yeah, the angle may be right, but it was curved more, so that lobe becomes the outer lobe, because not the angle as much as just the curve in it. Okay, so, whoops, my pen caught and it jumped a little bit, which is all right. Okay, it's hard to tell, but I think this one is overlapping that one. There's not really a shadow that gives me a clue. So I'll just make that assumption. I mean, this is, after all, from a photo. And from a photo, even though we think of those as capturing reality, you're going to really see a lot more in real life than you do from a photo. Photos are great for capturing it so that you can come back to it later, but don't get in the habit of drawing from photos. It's great to practice, don't get me wrong. It's great to practice, but it is not the same thing. A camera just doesn't capture everything. Okay, now for the disc flower. There's a lot of texture in there. And what I'm drawing is just some marks, some zigzaggy lines to indicate that texture. I'm never going to get it all exactly precisely like it is in there. I want a good indication of what that texture looks like, but I really shouldn't expect it to be exactly precisely. I'm just leaving in a few areas for the yellowish, and I want to put in, a good bit of texture with this. I can put in texture after I do the painting part of it too, but you will want to make sure that it is fully dry before you do that. Otherwise, your pen stops working and you think that there's something wrong with it, when in actuality, there's nothing wrong with the pen. It's that you're trying to draw on a wet surface. Okay, so I've got quite a bit of texture in there now. I can add more later after it dries. Okay, now for the base of the flower and the stem. And one thing to be really aware of is the width of the stem. It's really not nearly as wide as students often draw them. And I just freehanded that. It turned out just fine, I think. Even when I look at the photo, it kind of varies with the direction a little bit, so that's all good. And this is a sketch. Now I'm going to put in some of the texture in each of the ray flowers. You see these longitudinal lines that follow the contours where the petals fold, and that texture adds a tremendous amount to your drawing. Now the original blue lines that I drew in there, it doesn't matter if I erase them. Remember, they don't photograph. And even if I used a pencil, it's not going to make any difference if I leave some of that in there. In the old days, they called it pentimento because they didn't have erasers. They used breadcrumbs at that time. Just a little trivia there for you. Okay, so now I've got texture in there. So now it's time to go to the color. And let me put that pen away. Always good to put the top back on the pen. I'm going to show you now how to use the watercolor brush. There's water in the handle. I've pre-filled them all. And that's a great thing to do in the field especially because water's heavy. And if you're carrying a lot of water, you want to drink that water. That's what it's for. You have all the water you need for the watercolor, for sketches anyway, within the brush of this handle. All you have to do is squeeze the handle and it releases some water, and use your paper towel, and you don't need a whole roll of paper towels, just a bit, just to clean your brush. I'm going to go ahead and I've already pre-wet my colors. They're ready to go on my palette. This palette is just a little one that I tore off a little box that had other paints in it. So I pre-wet my colors. I'm going to go ahead and start with the yellow. And this yellow will never be, because it's the one that came with the set, it's never going to be the exact same yellow as that. You can modify yellows, but I can't make it precisely that color from what I have to work with because it's slightly more orange. And I'm also working on a watercolor paper, but it's not, you know, each watercolor paper has its own unique properties, each brand. You'll find through experience what you like. This particular watercolor paper is just an inexpensive watercolor paper, and it's maybe a bit more absorbent than what I usually work. Plus, it is, I'm working vertically. And working vertically, the colors are going to behave differently. They're going to run more. Most watercolorists would work flat or at a slight tilt, not a pure vertical. If it does run during this, I will show you how to deal with that. You just wick it up with your brush or with your paper towel, or even wipe it away with your finger. I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of yellow in the center of my flower while I've got it, and maybe a little bit more intense because it is a little bit more golden looking there. Okay, I'm going to clean my brush a little bit. And now I'm going to go to my reddish orange color. Right there. And I'm going to be layering my reds. Okay, so I'm just going to brush this on. If I were working flatter and this was a different kind of watercolor paper, they might blend out just a little bit more. You'll also find that the humidity of where you're working also has a lot to do with how well your colors may or may not blend. I've worked in very humid places where it seemed like the color would never, ever dry. And of course, if you're working in the sun, you're going to find that they dry almost instantaneously. So that's going to vary. So don't let that get you down, because it will, you know, we're working on sketches. We're working on nature journals. These are not finely tuned botanical illustrations. I can always make this darker if I want, just by adding a little bit more color in there. Another layer of color. Watercolor is a transparent medium. So you can always add more layers, and I can always modify the color with additional layers, even if I didn't get the color mixed precisely with my first layer. You'll always find, and you'll see that my palette is a little bit what you might consider dirty. Nothing in nature is going to be exactly the colors that you have in your tube or in your pan of paint. They work better when they're blended, when they're mixed. Now I'm going to put in some cooler red at the base because it's not exactly one color or the other. It has cool reds. And see how dry this is? This paper is really absorbing the liquid here. And I got out of my lines there a little bit. It really doesn't matter. Just keep in mind these are sketches. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry, and I'm going to go ahead and mix the colors for the center of the flower. I've already put the yellow in, and now I've got a brownish, purplish color. And you'll find that if you can describe the color, mixing the color becomes a lot easier then. So I've already got a little bit of green here left over from a previous mix. I'm going to pick up a little bit of that. I want this purplish brown color. You just touch more water. So I'm going to pick up some brown. And to make a purple, I need blue. And I need red. And I'm going to use the cooler red for this because that's what the color I'm seeing in there. And I can pick up more colors if it's not quite right yet. I can pick up some more color and continue until I get it where I want it. Okay, so coming back to my flower, I'm going to start brushing in there, and I want to make sure I'm really getting the texture in there. And again, I can add more layers if needed later, if it doesn't end up dark enough. And during this presentation, if I drift off sometimes, keep in mind that's just what happens when you're painting. You get in the zone, and it makes it difficult to talk. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to make that just a little bit darker, a little bit more purpley in a few areas. Especially at the base where there's more shadow. Okay, and I'm going to brush just a slight bit into some of these flowers, the ray flowers, just because it gives it more depth. Okay, now for my green for the base of the flower and the stem. I'm going to come back to my green again. And, you know, if I needed to clean my brush, I could do that, but I think I'll get the right color if I just mix it into the green I already had. I'm going to add just a touch more yellow because it looks slightly warmer, and that'll also green it up just a touch more. So let me try that in there. Yeah, that works pretty good. And then down my stem. So notice how much, and I was mixing in two different ways. I was mixing on the paper with on the petals, and then here I pre-mixed my color before I painted that. So that's really all you need to know for a really basic flower. And if I were in the field and doing a proper nature journal, I would also add other information. Say about the leaves. I would draw out some leaves. I would make notes about those, write my questions out. How are they attached to the stem? Are there any other specialized parts that I'm seeing? I mean, you can even cut open the flower and observe what it looks like on the inside, you know, the ovaries, the pistils, the stamens, all those parts of the flower. You can look at the bugs that may be around there, what kind of environment it is in. So you've got a lot of information you can gather about this. It's not really just about doing the flower itself, but that's just for today's demo where we're going to stop. Thank you with that.